Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming this morning to our event, Costing the Earth, How Can We Bring Down the Cost, or How Can We Bring the Cost of Childcare Under Control? My name's Lucy Lee, I work for Policy Exchange. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you to our very distinguished panel this morning, who will be sharing their views on this very important subject with us. First, I'd like to introduce you to Graham Allen MP, Labour MP for Nottingham North, spokesperson on both social services and also national heritage, but a long time ago. But also, most importantly, for this session, recently published 2 reports on early intervention, the next steps, and also smart investment, massive savings. Our next speaker today will be Anand Shukla, who's CEO of the Daycare Trust, or Chief Executive of Daycare Trust, one of the leading authorities on childcare policy in the UK, and has previously worked and stand at Bernardo's as well. And then our final speaker today will be Dr. David Singelton, OBE, who's taught in schools and universities both in the UK and Canada before joining Majesty's Inspectorate. He was Deputy Director of Ofsted in 2003, where he was responsible for introducing the framework for schools and colleges. And he currently sits on the Education Advisory Board for Kids Unlimited. The running order today, as I say, will be Graham Allen, followed by Anand, followed by Dr. David Singleton. And then I would like to open it up to questions from the floor, and I'd encourage you, please do all use this opportunity to ask questions of the panel. So without further ado, Anand.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me along this morning. I'm going to talk about early intervention in general, but one of the key parts of that early intervention cycle of measures, if you like, is around daycare, around looking after children both at home and outside the home. But let me just first of all talk about a sort of bigger picture, I guess, which is what early intervention is about and why I came to be involved in it. I always see early intervention as a 0 to 18. This is the sort of our salute. Early intervention, well, early interveners meet each other in the street, and we do this, we don't do it. And it's 0 to 18, but it continues. It's not just a linear thing. This is about passing on intergenerational skills, particularly emotional and social skills, and obviously in this context, parenting skills probably more than anything. So viewing the baby not just as someone who you want to have a great life in their own right, which you do, you want them to have great personal, social and emotional skills, but really even looking at the baby as a potential parent, someone who will pass on good stuff in turn to their children over an intergenerational cycle. And I guess I came to this not least because of my experience as a constituency member of Parliament, and I tell the story of when I was a brand new member of Parliament meeting Sharon with her little baby. She was 16 and baby's brand new. Came to my advice surgery, Mr. Allen, can you help me on my social security problem, my housing problem? So, you know, bushy-eyed and did the letters, made the calls, and I was able to help Sharon. And I think you're probably ahead of me already. 16 years later, Tracy, the little baby, comes to my advice surgery. I'm a little less bushy-eyed and bushy-tailed and bright-eyed, but oh, hello, yeah, can we help you? Yeah, my mum said that you helped her 16 years ago. Can you help me? I said, sure, what are the problems? I've got social security, a child support problem and a housing problem. So here we go again. And yes, she was carrying her brand new baby. So if I'm around long enough, I'm going to meet Bethany, who's going to ask me about the social security problems and housing problems. But in a way, I tell that story just to sum up the sort of my life experience as a member of Parliament. But you can talk to anybody in public service, a beat officer, a teacher, a doctor, a health visitor, and they will tell you this story about not being able to break that cycle. And unless we do that, we're actually going to forever be trapped in a late intervention culture, which is both incredibly expensive. We wait till problems get deep-rooted and then attempt vainly very often to dig them out. So it's very expensive and it is only partially successful. Whereas early intervention, giving parents and baby and baby, as baby grows, as a child and a young person, all the help that they need, when they need it at the earliest possible moment, is the antithesis, obviously, of the late intervention culture. It is both cheaper and it is more effective. Cheaper, I was use an example. I was fortunate enough to be, I think, the only Member of Parliament ever to run a local strategic partnership. I'll tell you a little about that, if you like, in questions. But it pulled together police, health, business, third sector in Nottingham. And I set the mission for that, which was to make Nottingham the first early intervention city. And we were quite successful at doing that. But the example I use is I begged, stole and borrowed to get 14 different programs around this 0 to 18 cycle. And one of those programs was the Family Nurse Partnership. And in order to get the Family Nurse Partnership to my city, and that is to give every teenage mum their own health visitor, who will stick with them from -9 months, as it were, through to the age of 2. In order to fund that, it was about a third of my teen mums in my city at that point, which was about 113 mums, 113 babies, in fact a few more, because some of them were on their second. So let's say around 230 individuals. It actually cost me to bring that to my city the same amount as it costs to bang up in a secure unit 3 16-year-old boys for a year. And may I say, 2 of those boys will offend again. So for me, this is a no-brainer. If you can get to people and give them the wherewithal to look after themselves, you are going to save, and this is my conversation with George Osborne, which I've had. You will save on drink and drug rehab costs, you will save on remedial teaching, you will save on a lifetime of benefits, you'll save on aspiration to work, all those things. It is a tiny investment to make things work effectively. And obviously, looking at the childcare situation, it is fundamental that we get that right and we shed the title of being the most expensive childcare in Europe, because that is a key component of what we do in early intervention. Now, I did this all on an all-party basis and continue to do that. My view is, if you want intergenerational change, you're not going to be able to do that in one government or with one party. We've all got to sign up to that. And having had some success in Nottingham, building a set of programs, teamed up with Ian Duncan Smith, and we wrote, may I say, I'm not Ian Duncan Smith's representative on earth. I will not explain his foreign policy views, his defence views, the universal credit. Thank you very much, though. But I do give the guy credit for having a similar view about the importance of early intervention. Whether that's funded adequately by the government is a question I'd like to talk about shortly, if I've got time. So the new government came in, they asked me to do a report on early intervention. I actually did 2. The first one was, what is early intervention, what is it about? Above all, what is the relationship with evidence-based policy making? There's a lot of great stuff out there, but very often it makes you feel good, it makes the staff feel good, it even makes the parents feel good, but is it actually doing the business with babies, children and young people developing social and emotional capability? So we listed a number of the schemes that we felt were good in that regard. And then a second report, I felt obliged really to do a second report, which was how you fund it, how you bring new money in to convince government that this was actually an effective use of money and would make them money, save them money. And secondly, to open up not just philanthropy but hard-edged capital from the private sector to bring that in so that we could fund some of these really good schemes, which is again why you need a strong evidence base. These people will not donate money, they will invest. And one quick example, we've got a great example going on in Peterborough about prisoners and recidivism. I was just over in the States and spoke to the deputy mayor in New York, and she's done a deal now with Goldman Sachs and a provider. Goldman's are not doing this for charitable purposes, they want to return, and essentially every kid who doesn't return to the New York prison system, a bounty is paid to Goldman's for the original investment, and of course the city, New York City, make a big saving because they're not needing that prison place anymore, and they can close down prison places and reallocate that spending. So there's a lot of stuff around that I did in my reports on expenditure. Maybe, it's not my field, but maybe we need to look at that in childcare. The use of freeing up local government so they can issue bonds. Maybe looking at ISAs a bit more imaginatively. Let's have a City of Nottingham early intervention bond. Maybe there's a childcare ISA out there, I don't know, they may exist already. But actually trying to be a little bit more thoughtful. It'd be wonderful to say, if you just hang on a little bit, we're going to have a government that's going to whack Sure Start style multi-billion-pound spending into childcare. Don't know. Or that we'll have as something even the size of Family Nurse Partnership, which is in a lot of places now. I don't think that's going to be the way we're going to run stuff, even if there's a change of government tomorrow. And finally, on the reports, the recommendation that made all the others work was to create an early intervention foundation. I'm currently in the process of doing that. What that foundation will do will be the 3 A's. Being a Member of Parliament, I have to have a way of trying to remember these things. 3 A's being assessment, which is the evidence base, advice, which we will give the best practice advice to how to set up an early intervention programme, what programmes you might want in your area, people available to go and see both local government, local health, policing, whatever, and give advice. And finally, what you've been getting this morning, advocacy, that there's got to be a better way than the late intervention culture. So that's pretty much a little potted version and a bit of an overview. The hot off the press news, unfortunately, is that I'm sure you've all read the technical guidance note 39 from about the rate support grant and the, you're nodding, you have, well done, and the amalgamation with the business rate. Really obscure document that came out of the bowels of the Department of Communities and Local Government. And if you turn, as I'm sure you already have, to page 140, you will see that unbeknownst to anybody pretty much, the government are going to do away with the early intervention grant. This is discretionary spending, and I think you'll probably know, if you're a local authority, you have to spend on the stuff you're mandated and have a statutory responsibility for. So if you take away a pot called the early intervention grant and you put it in the bigger pot, clearly local government, necessarily of all shades, will squeeze out the discretionary. This is a potential disaster for early intervention. Just at the moment we're creating an early intervention foundation. Will we have any early intervention funding to actually promote, advise, assess and advocate about? So right now we are in a very serious pitch battle with Whitehall. You know, I'm going to say something that may not be popular here. Not with the political class, as it were. This isn't, I honestly believe this isn't Cameron, Clegg and Pickles. I think this is people in Whitehall actually not wanting this to go ahead, and just Treasury officials and others saying, you know, here's a big saving. And we've woken up now the political level, so they are now in the spot and they do need to make some decisions. But that's really a potted history of early intervention. And a fundamental part of that is what we do on childcare. And with Anand and others very closely connected with the foundation, I hope very much that we may be in a position of using your expertise, being a clearinghouse for that and being able to send that off to just about anybody else at any level within the UK. At the end of a phone line, what have you got that works for us on childcare? How much does it cost? What are we doing about it? And we hopefully will be able to, with all our friends in the business, be able to make that contribution on the childcare agenda within that early intervention framework. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Graham. I'm going to speak for a few minutes about childcare policy and looking at you know, some of the reasons why we ask parents to pay some of the highest costs in Europe, as Graham said, and look at the question of regulation, which has been in the news recently. Just before that, just a couple of words on childcare policy since the coalition government took office. And again, this may not, you know, be kind of go down particularly well at a Labour Party conference. But I think there's been quite a lot to welcome actually in childcare policy. In particular, the commitment to the free entitlement, giving 15 hours free nursery education to every 3- and 4-year-old. And the extension of this free entitlement to the most disadvantaged 2-year-olds. These are significant sums of money at a time when funding is tight, and I think it'd be churlish not to recognise that. Our main criticism of government policy has been, well, twofold until last week, but I think I'm going to have to make it threefold after their business with the EIG, and I agree with everything that Graham's just said on that. I mean, I think where this has come from, our analysis is this has come from local government and chief executive and finance director level trying to remove any element of ring fencing and giving themselves as much flexibility on funding as possible. That's my sense. But we only found out about this last week as well when we had a briefing from a local authority. So we're quite annoyed. But our two main criticisms have been in relation to tax credits and the removal of the Sure Start ring fence. So the cuts in tax credits from 80% to 70% of childcare costs came in April 2011. Runs completely counter to the government's aspiration of making work pay. The average loss has been about £540 a year, affecting as many as 500,000 families, and we've heard from many parents that this cut has meant them having to give up work. The other area has been in relation to the Sure Start ring fence. This has led, according to the department's own figures, to over 100 centres closing down and a major reduction in services. Many centres now no longer offer childcare provision. And if you're trying to provide affordable childcare, closing down, reducing one of the few sources of affordable childcare provision in disadvantaged areas is not a particularly sensible way to go. Okay, so who should pay for childcare? Now, the approach that the UK has taken over the last 15, 16 years or so has been similar to many other European countries in that the costs of childcare are shared between the state and the parent. Other countries actually have an employer levy as well. Now, it's rightly recognised in this country on a cross-party basis that it's in the national interest to provide a childcare infrastructure. It brings benefits to children. High-quality childcare and early education achieves better social and cognitive development, and as the latest EPI study has shown, these effects are seen in maths results at age 11. It brings benefits for families. You have this, you enable parents to go out to work. It makes families financially independent, and women in particular have benefits for their pay and pension levels. It also brings benefits, and this is something that I think needs more focus, for the wider economy. Childcare provision means that businesses have access to the widest possible pool of talent in the economy, and this is hugely important in a competitive world. The situation that we have now is that many parents, mainly mothers, are not able to work once they have children because of the high cost of childcare. And it's a huge waste for them personally and also for the economy as a whole. So many benefits for the country, many benefits for families, and reasonable that parents should make a contribution. So what should that contribution be? Now, Daycare Trust does an annual childcare cost survey. This year, 2012, that shows that parents now pay an average of £5,000 a year for 25 hours childcare, which is a part-time place. Now, that masks a range of regional variations. In London, South East and Scotland, that average is closer to about £6,000 a year. And we found a nursery that charged £15,000 for a full-time place. So these are huge sums of money, and they are being asked to pay much more than in other OECD countries. Now, there is an OECD survey that comes out now. There are some questions about the data and making sure that you're comparing like with like. But essentially, if you look at the broader picture, it shows that the parental contribution in the UK can be something like 33% of net income in two-earner households. It's better for lone parents, but 33% of net income in two-earner households, whereas the OECD average is more like 13%. So even if those figures aren't quite right, you can see what the trend is. I don't think anybody really disputes that parents pay a lot more than other countries' parents do for childcare, particularly for under threes. Now, what can we do about this? Well, in our Childcare Commission response, we have recommended looking at many other countries in Europe which provide high quality, affordable childcare through a combination of supply-side funding, so that providers know that they're going to receive this funding, they know they're able to invest in training and development, and that the fees that parents are asked to pay are linked to parental income. So in many countries, the poorest parents don't actually pay anything. Okay, now I just want to say a couple of words on the regulation of childcare, because that's been a big issue this year. The new Minister for Childcare has published a paper suggesting that childcare is over-regulated, though I detect that's not one of her major priorities. I mean, we'll see what happens going forward. Now, this is a very complicated area, but overall, I have to say that we don't think that this is a case. There is an inherent tension, I think, of providing high-quality childcare which is affordable to parents, and it's important for everybody in the system, whether they're parents or providers or government, that unnecessary costs are removed. Now, some examples that we have picked out. There are administrative practices in relation to Ofsted and local authority compliance. Many providers that I speak to, and David maybe touch on this later, feel that this paperwork is unnecessary and excessive. You obviously need some information to ensure accountability for public money, but I think that we need to make sure that information requests are proportionate. Linked to this is the complexity of the funding mechanisms that we have in place and that inherited from the last government. And here I do agree with the new Minister. I think that there are considerable gains to be made by a simpler and more streamlined approach to childcare funding. Currently, if you're a provider, you may get funding for the free entitlement from your local authority, from many different childcare voucher providers, and from parents directly who may be getting financial support through the tax credit system. I have to phone my nursery probably every other month just to check what I owe them, because the amount they get for the free entitlement goes up and down. And then, I'll get this, can you, one month I have to pay them, £100. The other month they're sending me a cheque for £80. It's just, and if they're doing that with me, they're going to have to be doing that with everybody else. It's not a particularly sensible way of working. Streamlining that, I think, getting more money direct to providers is a very sensible idea. In our view, the main reason for high costs is the fragmented nature of the industry. Most childcare provision is delivered through the private and voluntary sector, many of whom are sole traders or small businesses. So compared to other countries, we have many small providers who struggle to remain sustainable. Such providers are also, and I touched on this earlier, confronted with the challenges of demand, which is variable and transient, as they have children passing through their systems. So, and that makes it hard, as I said, to invest in training and development, etc. Now, many parents, myself included, do welcome the small, localised nature of provision, but I do think we need to have a look at what the benefits of scale might be. Okay, just one word on childminders, because this is where most of the debate has been focused. It's been suggested that they should be able to care for more children than currently permitted, should not be inspected individually by Ofsted, nor should they be required to deliver the early years foundation stage. Now, I think we need to be very, very careful here. Trust levels for childminders are already lower than for group settings, and removing them from the same framework as nurseries will do nothing to reassure parents, nor will it give childminders a status and professional standing that their experience and training deserves. There are a number of myths, in my view, in relation to childminder regulation, the main one being that it is absurdly onerous to become a childminder and that you're bogged down with paperwork. We've got to have some common sense in how the Ofsted inspection framework works, and again, that's one of the areas that we've suggested. But I don't agree that the requirements for registration as a childminder are onerous. I think that if you are working unsupervised with young children, a first aid certificate and some basic training, which is often about 12 weeks, is a very minimum requirement. Again, let's have some common sense. If you've got first aid training from another sector, you shouldn't have to repeat it just for the purposes of Ofsted inspection. But I don't think that the idea that, which as I say was kind of being mooted over the last few months, that you've got all of these regulations, you deregulate, you get a whole new bunch of childminders coming in and that reduces the cost. I don't think that's going to happen. Okay, so balance needed then between appropriate and proportionate regulation, but removing significant layers of regulation, and this is probably my biggest concern, risks a race to the bottom in terms of quality, and the poorest families and children would lose out in particular as they'd be forced into using poorer quality provision in order to cut costs.
Thank you, Anand. Thank you very much indeed. David.
Thank you, Lucy. Good morning, everybody. I want to talk about regulation and about who should pay for childcare as well. But I'm speaking, of course, from the point of view of one of the larger providers. And if I ask the question, have we over-regulated childcare? I think my answer is yes, but I don't think it makes a huge difference to the cost, actually. I think the impact is marginal. You know, and if I start by stating the blindingly obvious, decent childcare is inherently expensive. You know, a couple of tragic recent deaths have reminded us, you know, that small children are vulnerable. They're also adventurous and curious. They need a lot of watching. They also need pretty consistent interaction with adults if they're to develop as they should. All this is expensive. You can't get away from it. You know, nearly 80% of the cost of childcare goes on staffing, and that's been so for many years. Not only is early years education and childcare expensive, they're also richly deserving, of course, of the attention of the state and therefore of the regulator. It's very difficult to think of any society that isn't concerned about the upbringing of very small children. I can think of one example, which was ancient Sparta, that actually used to expose young boys to extreme neglect in order to toughen them up. But then, surprise, surprise, by the 4th century, the Spartans could no longer raise an army because all the young men died at the age of about 6. If you think, I don't actually buy, I think, the idea that there is so much regulation in this country that it completely stifles initiative. If you think England is over-regulated, do some of the things that it's been my misfortune to do over the last 6 or 7 years. Try running a kindergarten in Poland, or opening an international school in Shanghai or the United Arab Emirates. In Saudi Arabia, just try getting into the country. You know, for the most part, we're not as over-regulated as perhaps we're told by some of the press. Now, if the whole regulatory framework were to be abolished, would my company do very much that is different? I think we would not. If we look, for example, at the adult-to-child ratios, you know, if, for example, the requirement to have 1 adult to 3 children were removed or raised to 4, would we change what we do? I think we wouldn't. In fact, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't. And I'm pretty sure that's true of the other large providers as well. There is no real appetite to change the ratios, you know, because we have our reputation to protect. If we fail to provide a decent service to parents or employers, they won't use us. And deregulation only leads to significant reduction in costs if it enables you to shed staff in a very labour-intensive industry. We're not looking to shed staff. Our main problem as a company has been to recruit and retain enough high-quality staff, and we've made progress on that in the last 2 years. Perhaps the recession has something to do with that, I don't know. But we aren't looking to change that. For example, we have a very strong early years advisory group. 6 people, quite highly paid, a very considerable overhead for a relatively small company. And at the moment, it spends some of its time, a significant proportion of its time, you know, helping with Ofsted and with inspection. If Ofsted were to be removed tomorrow, we wouldn't sack our advisory team. We might use them on different things. We might have them interfacing with parents more, for example, but we still would value what they do. That said, I think there are probably, from my point of view, 4 aspects of regulation, some of which Anand has touched on, that could and should be made less onerous. You know, I've said we wouldn't do much about ratios if we had the choice, and I think that's so, and I think it's true for other providers, but I do think it should be our choice. I think regulation should be less concerned with the fine detail of telling us how to do our job, and more concerned with actually defining what the outcome should be and the standards that society expects us to reach. Regulators should also, I think, be more careful about the small print and the way in which the small print tends to accumulate. Over the last few months, we've had to train our nursery staff, our practitioners, in respect of a number of documents, the new early years foundation stage framework. the new Ofsted framework, the guidance for providers, the guidance for inspectors, and the evaluation schedule itself. These are all complicated documents, which take a bit of grasping, and they change inordinately often, it seems to me. And more than that, there are some quite significant bombs buried in the small print. For example, the requirement now to show evidence of progress, and progress in removing the gaps between groups and so on, is proving terribly onerous, not just to us but to many others as well. The third thing I think that should happen is that regulation should be predictable, and it isn't. Ofsted does have a problem with consistency, and we spend far too much of our time, I think, trying to guess what attitude a particular inspector would take. And it's of course very difficult for Ofsted with hundreds and hundreds of inspectors all operating solo, but it is a problem for us. And finally, regulation shouldn't be duplicated. We can't really see any reason why, if you have a national regulator paid for out of taxes, that shouldn't be the gatekeeper to funding. We find it slightly mad that we're inspected twice over by Ofsted and local authorities. All of that, if all that were to happen, it would make our lives a bit easier and a bit cheaper, but not that much. Therefore, the question who should pay is very relevant. And the answer is, as colleagues have said, that the cost should in fairness be borne by those in whose interest it is that childcare should be both available and really good. And that means families with small children, the state, and also, I think, employees. And a third of our nurseries are workplace nurseries, and it does seem to me to be an aspect of decent employment practice that you help families with childcare. Now, most recent discussion about early intervention has focused on early intervention for greater social equality and for preventing the problems that Graham talked eloquently about. Particularly because we're all very aware of the Hart-Risley research in the United States, the 30 million word gap, as it were, between advantaged and disadvantaged children. And it's absolutely right that should be the case, that we should focus on that. But equality has many faces, and another of them, as has already been mentioned, is gender equality. Childcare is a necessity for many well-qualified women who wish to combine a family with pursuit of a profession with the minimum of interruption. I think they should have that right, and I think as a society and as an economy we need them to have that opportunity. About 6 years ago, Lord Leach published a report highlighting a lack of skills as a major problem for the British economy. I don't think things have got better since then, and we simply cannot afford to have highly qualified women who want to return to work prevented from doing so because of the cost of childcare, and often that is the case. I don't believe that childcare is actually much cheaper in European countries. It's just that the family pays less and the state and others pay more. And even in these austere times, it seems to me that in the ways that Graham has outlined, that's expenditure we should be willing to pay. It's just as vital a feature of the country's infrastructure as new motorways, or a high-speed rail link, or even an island built in the Thames to preserve the memory of Boris for a great prosperity. Thank you.
Very good. Right, lots of areas for discussion. Any questions from the floor to begin with? Yes.
Hi, I'm involved in the campaign at the moment to save some nurseries in government offices. Actually, HMRC is the employer. So it's interesting to hear you say an aspect of a decent employer is childcare provision. I mean, Graham may be aware of this campaign because one of the offices in question is in Nottingham. So I was wondering if the panel generally agreed that the government should be leading by example, especially when they're talking about making it pay to work.
I'd just like to pick that question up and focus on one word, which is sustainability, which is almost sort of a foreign word to the English language, and it applies very much in this case, but it also is part of a late intervention culture which we have, which dominates our resources, our organisation and our power, is reactive, it is piecemeal, it responds to crises, of which there are far too many. And so you read across to things like the sustainability of daycare and of nurseries and of workplace nurseries. Things are set up on a 1 year, 2 year basis. Often therefore you don't get the commitment, you don't get the training, and this is a thread that I think runs throughout our whole culture. And the opposite of that, of course, is to try and build in some long-term planning, and even if the funding isn't great, some sustainable funding. £100,000 every year for 10 years is better than £1 million in the first year. Have some consistency so that there is the process of building that can go on. Now there are a couple of things that I think in the bigger picture that are actually quite helpful now. Firstly, this is at the sort of macro political level. Firstly, we are for the first time ever in the middle of a fixed term parliament. So there's a 5-year term. We know when the date of the next election is going to be. There won't be damaging speculation, hopefully, for a couple of years before a general election. Media hype about we've got to cut and run, or we've got some good economic figures. The excuse, which is used by a lot of politicians and civil servants, without uncertainty and paralysis, I think is going to be removed, and I commend the Prime Minister for bringing that forward. I think the other thing is in respect of the consistency that ministers can bring to bear on this, because this is Cameron's first reshuffle. I have to say, Tony, he felt like there was a reshuffle every 3 months. He certainly felt, you know, slightly hysterical inside government that people weren't sure that they'd still be here, so you couldn't have that continuity. So there are big picture things, but the big picture things are all about that word sustainability. We need to build stuff in, even if it's on a small basis, and keep it going, because otherwise what we tend to be doing is protesting, crisis management, begging to find money to sustain your own employment in whatever field you are in social policy, rather than having some long-term view.
Yeah. Can I just add a little to reinforce what Graham said about the cost of not having effective early interventions? I do some work in a prison about 30 miles away from here, which has category B prisoners, which are, you know, violent prisoners for the most part, all with sentences of 4 years or more. About 2/3 of them are lifers or on indefinite sentences, so they're really hardcore criminals. It costs about 40,000 a year to keep them in jail, and when they're in jail, they mostly learn how to be more effective criminals when they go out of jail. Within the prison, there is an excellent function called the therapeutic community, where prisoners who've got themselves off drugs actually are helped to prepare themselves for life outside. And the preparation actually consists of intelligent interaction with concerned adults. And if they'd had that, you know, when they were between 1 and 3, it would have been a damn sight cheaper and done a damn sight more good.
May I just pick up one point on that? When I went to New York, I told you about going to see the Deputy Mayor. The scheme that is going to be operative for those prisoners, 16, 17 and 18-year-olds, what does it do? I didn't write this, it teaches them social and emotional capability. In other words, all the things that they should have had over the previous 16 years, trying to make that good as best people can is a very good programme.
The lady in the blue ticket.
Okay, thank you. My name's Lucy, I'm delegate for Holborn and St Pancras. This is possibly the most personal subject to me. Last year I worked with a group of other parents to save a nursery that was closed down. We got it reopened in Camden. We worked with the local council and it's been transferred over to the voluntary sector, and we saved it. It was one of the most proudest achievements of my life. All my children have been there. And we also did a similar thing with an after-school club as well. And I just think that I find it quite baffling how people how we don't have just an acceptance that we need childcare, just as we need schools, we need hospitals. We expect even very modestly paid people to fund these enormous fees. We don't expect everyone to send their kids to private school. Why is it different? I don't get it.
I agree. Daycare Trust was set up to make childcare and early education as established part of the education system of the welfare state as education post-5. And no, I agree with that absolutely. I think, to be fair, things have moved on since even since 2010. Before that point, I wouldn't have been confident that the Conservative Party was signed up to this agenda, which came under the last Labour government. I think we've now got this on a cross-party basis, and I think that there is genuine recognition at the top of government that the high cost of childcare is a problem for all
It
kinds.
destroys people's lives, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a state of the economy now that is preventing
it's
real
stopping
movement.
people from working. It stops women from working.
Yeah.
Unless you're rich, you can't work, or you have to accept that you're going to have a time of your life where you spend all your salary, which is what I think. If you're a poor person, you're excluded. If you're a middle-income person, you accept that all your money goes on childcare. It's a tiny percent who makes any money from work when children are young, and that's wrong at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, I think actually, with respect, it's even worse than that. Apart from all of that, you lose crucial momentum in your career, don't you?
Definitely.
That is one of the things that worries professional women.
Well, I had to change my career, so yeah, I agree.
The lady in there.
Yeah, Denise Burke, United for All Ages and the Good Care Guide. Graham used the word sustainability. I mean, we had this, what I believe to be quite a bizarre announcement last week of the 100 million capital in order to build capacity for the 2-year-old free places. I question where that 100 million figure evolves from. It doesn't really seem evidence-based. We know how many 2-year-old places we need to create, but I don't really see any real evidence of the fact that there is lack of capacity within nurseries to provide. What would have been better was a commitment for revenue funding, sufficient revenue funding for 2-, 3- and 4-year-old places, because, and it might be something David wants to comment on, but we know a lot of the big providers won't just offer the free early education place, because as most providers know, and are quite verbal about, the funding for the free entitlement just doesn't actually cover the cost of delivery. So I think we've got a huge issue with sustainability as far as the free offer is concerned. And the other thing being, when we talk about all this additional money capital to build new places or enable existing providers to expand, we've got an awful lot of children's centres. If they haven't closed, as Anand said, they're sitting dormant for most of the day. They are in those places where those very 2-year-old disadvantaged children are. There are ample buildings there. It's not more buildings we need, it is the revenue to make it sustainable.
No, I think we're kind of doomed to agree violently with each other this morning. I think we do feel, most providers feel that the money available doesn't cover the true costs, and therefore, public fees, public expenditure has to be topped up by parents, frankly. That said, the economics of the business are awful. I think in the last childcare survey, about 24% of private providers were actually running at a loss, and another 11% or so were, breaking even. It's not an area in which you can make a lot of money. And our great worry, of course, is that people simply cannot afford our services, so we go out of business, of course. Unless there is more appropriate intervention from the state.
Just to flip back briefly to the earlier question, and it links back to sustainability again. If you look at other places, you know, we're the weirdos. This isn't a standard practice. Other people do it way better. And if you look at what Sweden has done and some of the Nordic countries, layering in bit by bit provision, not breaking the bank initially, but over 40 years, actually providing a system where there has been culture change. And those countries do this way better. And it's only us who invest only in fire engines rather than have a smoke alarm policy for the country. You know, this is all crisis money. More specifically on the points that were made about the 2-year-old offer. Initially, I have to say, what a wonderful thing that is. That's great. I've campaigned for it. I wrote in my report about it. It's wonderful. I'm glad we're doing it. Then look at the small print, as always. And if all you're doing is juggling the same pot in order to get headlines or to, you know, score points, as it were, you're not going to make the progress. The reason I say that is, firstly, the 100 million you mentioned that Nick Clegg announced is capital. It comes from departmental underspend. Well, with slashing expenditure in departmental budgets, how the hell do we find that sort of slack? What is wrong with people that we're not using all the money? And you know, we're getting to the end of the financial year, so let's, you know, we can find 100 million all of a sudden. I'm glad we have, but nonetheless, it does indicate that Whitehall is a clod. It is insensitive. The people who can do this better are local government and people on the ground. So I have another hat to wear, which is I chair the Select Committee on Political and Constitutional Reform, and it is essential that we free up local government in this country. It fights with one hand tied behind its back, and again, unlike any other Western democracy, our local government is the vassal, agent and slave of the centre. It's illegal to do that in America and France and Germany and anywhere else. They laugh at you when you say this is your system. So we need to get full value from every single pound and not suddenly find, oh, we've got 100 million over here we haven't spent. You know, where shall we put that? What can we give for the DPM to make a nice announcement at this party conference? I'm being very cynical there, shouldn't be. But find the big money you talk about, the revenue cost of all this, you know where that's coming from? Big bucks. They're taking about a quarter of the expenditure on the early intervention grant out of the early intervention grant. So if anyone here is doing something on the Troubled Families Initiative, on Sure Start, on Family Nurse Partnership that I mentioned, on the Family Intervention Project that I brought to my city, on work with the offenders, the children of offenders, prolific and persistent offenders, most doomed to repeat that intergenerational cycle I told you about. If you're doing any of that stuff, let me tell you, you're going to be doing it with 1/4 less than you're doing it with last year, when we're trying to expand this provision. So, going for a big blockbuster, we're doing great stuff for 2-year-olds, yes, but be careful, because if it's from exactly the same pot of money, something has to go. And that's why we've sort of gone a bit berserk in the last few days, trying to let people know that tucked away in this obscure little technical document, that is precisely what is happening, unfortunately.
I've got a raft of hands. I'm going to give Anand a chance to respond, and then I'm going to take 3 questions, 1, 2, and 3 next.
Okay, well, I'll go quick. I just wanted to pick up on this point that Graham made about layering in provision over a period of time. And I made a note of that expression, Whitehall is a clod, which I think is great. And that's exactly what's happened in Scandinavian countries. They've invested in this since the 1960s. And often, interestingly, this has come from employers, the demand for this. So in Denmark in the 1960s, they achieved full employment for men. So, you know, they had skills shortages, and it was a labour market decision that led them to start providing universal childcare to enable women to stay in the workplace. Now, it's very difficult, and we would caution against making direct causal links between childcare and female labour market participation, but in Scandinavian countries, the rate is about 85%. Okay, here in the UK, in France, Germany, Netherlands, about 75%. And in Ireland, which has minimal childcare provision, it's 60%. So you can see the benefit of investing steadily, sustainably over time. And again, going back to Denmark, I went to this kind of eye-opening presentation from the Denmark Children's Minister a couple of months ago, and she said, if there's a deficit in childcare provision somewhere locally, the people who kick up the biggest fuss are the equivalent of Denmark's CBI. Because they see it as a real issue for their businesses. So if we can get our own CBI doing exactly the same thing, I think there will be real progress made.
Just to give an indication on the 2-year-old provision, I'm chair of the Children's Trust in Hyndon, which is about 25 miles north of here. We are at 74% capacity with our 3 and 4-year-old entitlement, and we're full. We don't have any more places. We're about 200 to 300 places short across the borough. Chuck on top of that 20% of entitled 2-year-olds, and we've got a huge problem. And everyone's sat around scratching their heads thinking, well, where are we going to put these kids for a start? So it is huge, and £100 million is an absolute disgrace. It's an insult to providers, in truth. My question is though around British minority ethnic families. We know in Hyndon, I speak about Hyndon in particular, that we have real difficulty getting into those families and getting the children into universal provision. We know that the children stay in the family longer. This puts strains on primary school, and it runs all the way through into secondary school. I wondered if anybody had any perhaps best practice or any ideas about how.
Hi, Mark Wilson, Westminster Advisors. We work with the leading childcare voucher companies, which is a relatively little known tax exemption which actually incentivises particularly basic rate employees worth about 20% roughly of the average childcare cost that Anand mentioned. I was wondering what the panel's thoughts on getting more employers involved in the childcare system, using that as an example of positive partnership working potentially between employers and employees in the childcare sector.
I just wanted, my name is Jenny North, I work for the Infants Trust and we fund some early years providers. I wanted to get the panel's thoughts on the timing of the Affordable Childcare Commission, which to me seemed a little suspect, coming on the same day as the Nut Brown review, which made the strong and very evidence-based point that it's qualifications of workforce that drive quality in early years provision, and then on the same day the government announced they're going to look at relaxing regulation and and driving down probably pay. To me that seemed pretty calculated. I was wondering, what do the panel think about the chances of getting that Childcare Commission to say something useful, and if it's anything useful about establishing quality as the paramount consideration in all early years in childcare provision, with, to my mind, flexibility and affordability being absolutely key levers to encourage parents to take it up, but they cannot be the drivers of our provision. Of course it's an important employment tool, but it is first and foremost must be about quality. And I just feel that although I completely take on board what Anand said and Graham said about it's good this government have answered on childcare, it's still a very cynical move to me. That's how
Thank you. So we've got questions on access to the earning families, we've got questions on getting employers more involved, and then the important question as well about how we drive up quality and see the flexibility as a lever to that, but it's important about the quality of the provision.
Should I quickly come back? In terms of engaging communities from who are slightly kind of marginalised from the system, this is one of the key areas actually. If you look at the free entitlement, which generally has been a great success actually, levels of take up amongst 3 and 4 year olds are well over 90%, 95, 98%. It's been a real success. But if you break that down and look at where levels are lowest, you're looking at amongst the poorest areas, that figure drops down to 60, 70%. If you're looking at communities such as the ones that you've talked about, you've got similar levels there. I mean, one of the kind of issues that you have to put have to deal with is I think there's often suspicion of state and official authorities. And one of the things that we've developed at Daycare Trust over the years is a project that we call Parent Champions, where we work with parents from a particular community that's underrepresented, and they then make that case for affordable childcare and the benefits of taking up high quality childcare and so on. And that's worked really well, both for the families that then come into the childcare system, as well as the parent champions themselves. Some huge benefits in terms of going back to it. I'd be happy to talk to you about that afterwards if that would help. In terms of childcare vouchers, I mean, Mark, you know our view. I mean, I think that this is a great benefit, and it's the way I think that employers can support their families with the cost of childcare in a way that isn't particularly onerous for them. The issue that I have with childcare vouchers is that it's what I call an arbitrary benefit. I get it because I've got a nice employer, me. But you know, the organisation next door, they probably won't get it. So I want to see, and we've specifically requested this in the Childcare Commission, I want to see how we can get all employees to have access to this in a way that that doesn't impose unnecessary burdens, and also I want to see this extended to the self-employed as well. I think that's just kind of a gap that needs filling. The timing of the Affordable Childcare Commission, I knew it was coming, but again, I mean, I'm slightly unclear to the motivation. I think that when it was set up, I thought that it was a vehicle for getting an agreed coalition view on the direction of childcare policy for the final 2 years of Parliament. I don't know, and there are maybe others here who can add something to that. I think it's become potentially something much more significant with the change in ministers, and I think that this could be the vehicle for Elizabeth Truss if she does want to change the direction of policy. Say, I've done a thoroughgoing review, and this is what I want to do in terms of regulation and so on. So it could become much more significant actually, but on that I think we have to wait and see.
Any comments?
I agree with the last point. I don't see the coincidence of timing as necessarily sinister at all. I think it's just failing to put things together in the way the government does. I'd like to get back to the point that was made about hard to reach families. You know, I have some vicarious experience of this in Blackpool, you know, which has some of the most disadvantaged people in the country. Very few ethnic minority people. You know, but nevertheless, the difficulties of reaching people, you know, who have really very hard lives indeed, is very great. And there was actually a project which was being operated through Barnardo's by the local authority, which was having some success in reaching those people. But I have to report that the funding for it ceased, and the local authority has had to stop it.
Yeah, I think on the ethnic minority and hard to reach groups, not necessarily ethnic minority. This is why we need the full spectrum of people involved, particular programs, because you can find these people, you can encourage them. I was hearing about Manchester stuff yesterday in Ardwick, where they basically listed, if you might call it, the 100 most difficult families, let's say, to reach, and have just gone out there and done doorstep work and gone into the community centres and really done a deep trawl to get to these people and talk to them and send a Somali outreach worker to that Somali community that has been difficult to get into, etc. So this isn't something that we expect you in Daycare to do because you're having a problem with it. It is something that we've got a problem with in lots and lots of different areas. So you've got that whole cycle of interventions and actions. You've got a data track, you've got proper exchange of information. There's a little bit too much of computer says no, oh yeah, data protection, we can't. You know what, let's bottom that one out, because very often that's a myth and people live on that, and challenge it and sort it out, because those people can be reached and must be reached. Quality, as Jane was saying, absolutely fundamental. We need the best people in the field, not making up the numbers, as it were. And again, just look at what happens in the Nordic countries. They have very highly qualified people, very well trained, permanently retrained people, because you're dealing with the most precious thing on our earth, which is the brain of a child, the brain of a baby. And at that point, you need absolutely the very best to go into that child. Final point is something that made great play over in my first report.
Okay.
Attention! Oh. Yes.
Say something.
I think we'll keep going.
All right,
We're
I think
pushing
yeah.
time.
I keep it. And that was the handover between health and education. And just to make sure, you know, there's a wall, and on one side is health, and on the other side we hope there's someone in a nursery or someone in a childcare situation. And we throw the baby over the wall, and we pretty much hope that someone's going to catch it on the other side. It's 36-month point. And to get that transition, a smooth transition, means that you don't start missing people in the various bureaucracies, and that too is really fundamental if you want to maintain quality, because it's no good having a great first 30 months experience and then a very poor run up to going to school.
I'm very conscious that we're pretty much at the end of time. I will take, because there was a whole raft of hands that went up, I will take 2 more questions, and to be fair, I haven't asked that end of the room. So 2 questions at the back, and then if I could ask the panel to wrap up with their concluding comments and response.
Jonathan Rannings-Bernardo, one way that we're recommending to get more money into the early years sector is actually that the government should be stretching the pupil premium. What we've identified is that there's a pupil premium from 5 to 16, and there's a pupil premium now at 2, but there's nothing at 3 and 4, and we think that that premium should be extended to the free entitlement. What do the panel feel about that suggestion?
And the next question, sorry.
Yes, I'm the education correspondent at Holyrood Magazine based in Edinburgh. I wondered if I could push any of the panel to address the Scottish policy context, particularly with the consultation on the Children in Early Years Bill. And perhaps if Graham wanted to speak to the way in which early intervention is embedded in the public service reform, I'm not sure.
Right, first of all, let's David.
Well, on the pupil premium, you know, talk to my wife about that. She's the head of a school which has 400 kids who receive the pupil premium, and there was no extra money. The various other streams of funding that went into schools with lots of disadvantaged pupils were wrapped into the pupil premium. She lost £250,000 from her budget, and the pupil premium added £250,000. So the degree to which it could be stretched, I think, is broadly limited.
Well, I think it's going up year on year, and we've done the projections, and that would lever in £1,200 a child into the early years sector that currently doesn't exist. That's £1,200 for every child that would be eligible for free school meals at 3 and 4 years old. And you think what your nurseries can actually do, providing speech and language therapy, all sorts of different interventions, you could lower the ratio.
Yeah, I mean, on the pupil premium, you know, on the face of it, seems sensible, but I shall wait until I've actually read your report, which is still my intro, I have to say. So we'll give you a considered view once I've done that. On the Scottish policy context, Daycare Trust published a report in February this year called the Scottish Childcare Lottery. And that you know, looked at issues to do with you know, the high cost of childcare, the low availability there, actually, particularly in some of the more rural areas. And we were pleased to see the response of the Scottish Parliament and the First Minister to that, who then came out 2 weeks later and said, look, by the autumn of 2014, we'll have 600 hours free childcare, or affordable childcare for everyone. 600 hours, meaning that our claim that Scotland was lagging behind England would be increased, because here I think it's something like 575, so an extra 28 minutes per week I think it works out to ensure that Scotland is lagging behind. So I think that's good. I mean, I spoke at an event at Holyrood in May with the Children's Minister, who is very engaged with this agenda, and I think there's a real kind of desire to push this forward. And I think, you know, I mean, I'd be interested to get your view on this, but I think there's a real stage at which, you know, we're looking in Scotland, looking around at other countries to look at what's worked well, what's not worked so well. I mean, we talked about, you know, some of the failings of the statutory framework in England. Actually, I don't think that, you know, kind of this, having sufficient childcare for all working families, and, you know, kind of that's particularly worked well. So how do you enforce that mechanism there? The importance of ensuring that parents have access to information about their childcare options. having kind of good childcare provision, particularly in some of the more rural and remote areas, important child monitoring. All of that, I think, people are looking at quite closely. So I'm quite optimistic about it. Actually, I think there is a real appetite. But as I say, I think the consultation's just closed, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Last week. So we'll wait to see what the response is. But I'm fairly upbeat.
I just love going to Scotland. I just feel like I stick my fingers into the electricity sockets. There's just so much going on. People can get on and do stuff. The governments in Scotland have pulled together £50 million extra, which is, in Scottish terms is a lot, on an early intervention programme over 5 years, which again is wonderful because you can start to stretch out a time horizon on that rather than a quick fix somewhere for a headline. I commend the way they've done that. I was in Edinburgh just last week because we're trying to make sure that if we do get this early intervention foundation, it's going to have a Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish dimension, because where we have devolution, where we have people being allowed to get on, use their money and their own imagination, we find just inspirational stuff going forward. So I want Devo Max for England, so that our English local authorities can get on without looking up all the time, being risk averse, being told what to do, suffering centrally imposed cuts without even their knowledge. And then I think we'll be able to break out of this syndrome of being the last country in the empire, being ruled by Whitehall, and get on and do the job as we see fit. Final point is, we're now just past the halfway mark of the coalition government. They've had some rocky times, but they'll be looking for their second half of their parliament. They will be looking, whether they call it this or not, a mid-term refresh. I think it's incumbent upon everybody in this room, and perhaps Policy Exchange might be the umbrella body to do this, but to set one simple task for the government in its mid-term refresh that it wants to see happening in childcare, and hopefully childcare and early intervention. I don't know what that one thing is, but maybe Policy Exchange, with all their experience, rather than produce a mighty document that may not be read by ministers, actually produce a really sharp thing that is amenable to actually being enacted in the next 2.5 years or so of this government. I think if we do that, we'll have a very practical outcome from what I think, and surely the panel will agree it's been a really good exchange this morning.
Thank you. Thank you all very, very much indeed for your time. Thank you enormously to our distinguished panel, and I'd like to join with you to thank them very much.